Everyone in the village of Coldbrook had an opinion about Elias Morrow. Most of those opinions were not kind. The baker said he was lazy. The blacksmith said he was strange. The village headman, a round and self-important man named Aldrich, once said publicly that Elias was proof that some men were simply born to struggle and never rise above it. The crowd around him had laughed. Elias had been standing at the back of that same crowd. He had heard every word. He had said nothing, turned around, and walked the long road back to his farm. That was the kind of man Elias was. Quiet, patient, worn smooth by years of weather and silence, the way a river stone is worn smooth, not broken, just shaped by something most people could not see or understand. His farm sat at the far edge of Coldbrook, separated from the rest of the village by a crumbling stone wall that leaned at an angle as though it were tired of standing. The farm itself was small. The soil was dry and reluctant. Elias grew just enough crops to keep himself and his daughter fed, and most seasons, just enough was all he got. He woke before the sun every morning, worked until his back ached, and went to bed without complaint. He owned almost nothing. He asked for almost nothing. And the village, satisfied with this arrangement, forgot he existed for most of the year, except when they needed someone to look down on. His daughter, Nadia, was 24 years old, and worked at the village inn to earn extra money. She was sharp-minded and proud, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubbornness. She loved Elias the way you love something that also causes you pain, deeply, quietly, with a small knot of shame that she carried everywhere and never spoke about. Every time she saw him walk through the village in his patched coat and muddy boots, every time someone smirked or made a comment, she felt that knot tighten. She had never told him this. She did not know how. One morning, in early autumn, something arrived in Coldbrook that had not arrived in a very long time. A stranger. His name was Soren. He came on horseback, dressed plainly, but carrying himself in the way of a man who was used to being obeyed. He said he was a traveling trader looking for lodging. He took a room at the inn, paid in advance with coins that were slightly too good for a simple trader, and spent his first evening sitting in the corner of the common room, listening more than he spoke. Nadia served him his meal that night. He asked her polite questions about the village. She answered politely. Then he asked, almost as an afterthought, whether there was anything interesting to see in Coldbrook or the surrounding area. Nadia almost laughed. There was nothing interesting in Coldbrook. There never had been. She told him so. Soren nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something. Then he asked one more question. Is there an old man living on the edge of town? Keeps to himself, works a farm alone? Nadia looked at him carefully. Why? Heard about him from someone on the road, Soren said, and returned to his food. Nadia said nothing more, but she went home that night with a strange feeling she could not name sitting in her chest. The next day was market day, the village square filled with vendors and noise and the smell of bread and animals. Elias came to buy a small amount of grain, just enough to carry him through the next planting season. He counted his coins carefully before leaving the house. There were not many. He was standing quietly at the grain stall, waiting his turn, when the trouble started. A merchant from the northern road had arrived with a wagon pulled by a large black horse. A powerful animal, clearly trained for long distances, not for crowded market squares. Something in the noise and the press of people spooked it. The horse reared, the harness snapped, and suddenly 200 pounds of frightened animal was charging straight through the middle of the market, people scattering in every direction, a woman stumbling, a child frozen in its path. Elias moved before anyone else did. He stepped directly into the horse's path, arms loose at his sides, and he did not flinch. The horse bore down on him, and then, 3 feet away, it stopped. Not because it was grabbed or tied or cornered, it simply stopped. Its hooves planted in the dirt, its enormous head dropped low, its breathing slowed. Elias reached out and placed one hand on its nose, and the horse stood as still as a statue, calm as a sleeping dog. The square was silent for a moment, then someone laughed and said it was luck. Someone else agreed. The merchant thanked Elias gruffly, collected his horse, and the market went on. Most people forgot about it within the hour. But Soren had been watching from the edge of the square. He did not move for a long time after. His face gave nothing away, but his eyes were very still, very focused. the way a man's eyes go when he has just found something he has been searching a long time for. That evening, Soren walked the road to the edge of the village. He found Elias mending a section of the stone wall at the boundary of his farm, working by the last light of the sun with the careful, unhurried movements of someone who had learned not to waste energy on rushing. "You stopped that horse today," Soren said. Elias did not look up. Someone had to. "I've seen trained soldiers fail to stop a horse like that. They use ropes and muscle and usually end up in the dirt." "I didn't use muscle," Elias said simply, and set another stone in place. Soren was quiet for a moment. Then, "I serve the Lord of the Northern Reaches. He sent me here." Elias's hands went still on the stone, just for a second. Then he continued working. "I don't think you're what you appear to be," Soren said. Elias stood up slowly, brushing dust from his hands, and looked at Soren for the first time. It was a steady look, plain and direct. Soren had faced difficult men in his life. Hard men, dangerous men, men with power, and men who wanted it. But something in that steady gaze made him feel, without understanding why, as though he were the one being measured. "Then you should go back and tell your lord what you found," Elias said quietly. "A farmer, a wall, and an old man who is done with whatever it is you came here for." He picked up his tools and walked back toward the farmhouse. Soren stood at the wall for a long time after. He was supposed to write a report that night. He did not write it. 3 days later, Nadia found the letter. She had been cleaning the house, something she did every few weeks, moving through her father's few possessions with the efficiency of someone who had grown up with very little and knew exactly where everything was. In a book on the top shelf, tucked between the pages like a pressed flower, was an envelope, old. The paper had yellowed at the edges, but the seal on the back was still sharp and clear, a wolf in mid-howl, stamped in dark wax. She told herself she would not read it. Then she read it. It was formal and old-fashioned, written with the careful language of official documents. It referenced things she did not fully understand: territory agreements, clan oaths, the authority of 7 ruling families. But one line was perfectly clear. It began, "To His Grace, King Elias of the Northern Wolf Clans." She read it 3 more times. Then she sat down on the floor, because her legs stopped working properly. That night, when her father came in from the fields, she was sitting at the table with the letter in front of her. She asked him one question: "Who are you?" Elias looked at the letter. He looked at his daughter. He sat down across from her. "Your father," he said. "That is not an answer. It is the only answer that matters," he said quietly. "Put the letter back, Nadia. Please. Tell me the truth." He was silent for a long time. The fire in the stove ticked and settled. Outside, the wind pushed against the walls of the small house. Then he said, "I was something a long time ago. I chose to stop being that thing, so that you could grow up safe and quiet and without enemies. That is the whole of it. I do not regret the choice. I will not undo it." Nadia stared at him. There were 100 questions boiling up inside her. But she looked at her father's face, at the lines in it, the patience in it, the deep, unmoving stillness of it, and somehow the questions could not find their way out. She put the letter on the shelf. She went to bed. She did not sleep. The following week, a second stranger arrived, and this one was nothing like Soren. Victor Crane came with 12 soldiers, 2 wagons, and the kind of loud, organized arrival that is designed to make people feel small before he even opens his mouth. He was tall, well-dressed, silver-haired, and he had the face of a man who had spent many years deciding things about other people. He took over the best rooms at the inn, without asking the price. He summoned the village headman for a private dinner. He made it very clear, without saying so directly, that refusing him anything would be unwise. In the village square the next morning, he made an announcement. He said there was a man hiding in this area, a man who had abandoned his responsibilities and run from justice many years ago. He said this man owed a great debt to the Northern Territories, and that anyone who had sheltered him or hidden information about him would be considered equally responsible. He offered a reward for information. Then he said one more thing, almost gently. "This man has a daughter living in this village. She too will be held to account under Northern law if her father does not come forward." Nadia was standing in the crowd. She felt the air leave her lungs. She ran to the farm. Elias was at the far end of his field when she arrived. She told him everything, quickly, her voice shaking. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood quietly for a moment, looking at the rows of crops he had planted alone, the fence he had mended alone, the small house he had kept standing alone for more than 20 years. Then he said, "Go back to the inn. Stay there. Do not speak to him or his men." "Father." "Go, Nadia." She went. She looked back once. He was still standing in the field, looking at nothing, completely still. She had the sudden, strange feeling that she was seeing him for the first time. Victor's soldiers came for Elias the next morning. They found him on the road into the village, walking calmly, as though he had been expecting them. They surrounded him, spoke to him roughly, and brought him to the village square. A small crowd gathered: the baker, the blacksmith, the headman Aldrich, and many others. Nadia pushed to the front of the crowd and stood there with her hands clasped tight together. Victor walked out to meet him, with the unhurried confidence of someone who already knew how a story would end. He walked a slow circle around Elias. He looked at the worn coat, the muddy boots, the hands rough from years of hard work. He said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Is this what you became? This is what the great Alpha King chose for himself?" The crowd murmured. Some of them looked at Elias with new curiosity. Most of them looked at him the same way they always had. Victor leaned closer and dropped his voice so that only Elias could hear. "Admit that you are nothing now. Say it publicly. Renounce every claim you ever had, and I will leave your daughter alone. It is a simple thing. Humble men do it every day." Elias said nothing. Victor stepped back and nodded to his soldiers. They were not gentle. Nadia watched her father absorb it without making a sound, without asking for mercy, without showing anything on his face except that same deep, patient stillness that had always made her feel somehow both proud of him and frustrated. She found herself gripping the arm of the man beside her without realizing she had done it. Then Victor made his final mistake. He pointed at Nadia and told his soldiers to bring her forward. He intended to use her as the final piece of pressure, the thing that would break the stubborn old man in the dirt. What happened next, the people of Coldbrook would talk about for the rest of their lives, though most of them would never be able to describe it exactly right. Elias rose to his feet. He did not shout. He did not rush forward. He simply stood up, slowly, and something in the air of the square changed. It was not something you could see or touch. It was closer to a pressure, the way the air feels before a very large storm, when the sky has not yet done anything but your body already knows something enormous is coming. The horses tied at the market posts shifted and stamped. 3 of Victor's soldiers took a single involuntary step backward, without seeming to notice they had moved. The headman Aldrich went down onto one knee, and could not immediately explain why. Victor stared at the man in front of him, the worn coat, the muddy boots, the face of a farmer. But the eyes were something else entirely. They were calm and clear and bottomless, like looking down into a very deep well and realizing you cannot see where it ends. "I gave you 23 years, Elias said. His voice was quiet. It was the quietest voice in the square, and yet somehow everyone heard it perfectly. "I gave you the territories. I gave you the title. I stepped back so that a war would not happen, and my family would not be harmed. That was my gift to you." He paused. "You will not touch my daughter, and you will not be here tomorrow." Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in many years, the words did not come. Then the horses came. 7 riders appeared at the entrance to the village square. They were well-dressed, well-armed, and they carried banners that the people of Coldbrook did not recognize. 7 different crests, each representing one of the great northern clans. The riders dismounted, walked forward through the stunned crowd, and stood before Elias. One by one, all 7 went down on one knee. "My king," the first one said. The others repeated it. 7 powerful men, leaders of 7 clans, kneeling in the dirt of a small village square before a man in a patched coat. The silence that followed was complete. Even the wind seemed to stop. Old Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. He had sent word to the council the day Soren first arrived. He had waited, said nothing, and trusted that the right people would come. He had been right. Soren stood a little apart from Victor's soldiers. He looked at Elias. Then he looked at the man he had been sent to serve. Then he walked to Elias's side, drew his sword, and placed it on the ground at Elias's feet. "I serve the king," he said simply. "The real one." Two of Victor's other soldiers followed, then a third. Victor looked around the square, at the kneeling council, at the soldiers who had crossed to the other side, at the crowd of villagers watching in stunned silence, at the man standing at the center of all of it, who still had not raised his voice. For the first time, Victor Crane had nothing to say. He was taken into the council's custody without a single word of resistance. All his bluster, all his careful plans, all his years of borrowed authority, they had ended here, in a quiet market square, in a village at the edge of the world, because he had misjudged the depth of a still river. When it was over, the crowd slowly broke apart. The soldiers organized themselves. The council members spoke quietly among themselves. And Elias walked to where Nadia was standing. She was not crying. She was standing very straight, the way she always stood when she was trying to hold herself together. "I was ashamed of you," she said. The words cost her something to say. "I am sorry. I did not understand." "You understood exactly what you saw," Elias said. "There was nothing wrong with your eyes, Nadia. I showed you a farmer. That is what I chose to be. But you were so much more than that." He looked at her for a long moment. "I was your father." "That was always more than enough for me." She stepped forward and held him. He held her back, this big, quiet man with the calloused hands and the worn-out coat, standing in the square of a village that had spent years deciding he was worth nothing, and he held his daughter as though she were the only title he had ever wanted to keep. Later that afternoon, Elias walked through the village one last time. Not with an army behind him, not with banners or ceremony. Just him, walking slowly, the way he always had. The headman Aldrich came forward with his hat in his hands, tripping over his apologies. Elias listened politely. Then he said, "Open the water easement to every farm on the edge of town. That is all I ask of you." Aldrich agreed so quickly that he nearly fell over himself. Mira, the woman who had stepped forward to defend Elias in the square, the only one who had spoken, found a small deed of land on her table that evening. No note, no explanation. She understood. Old Marcus met Elias at the gate of his farm. The old man had known the truth for a long time, since the very beginning, in fact. He had kept the secret because Elias had asked him to, and because he was the kind of man who understood that some people need to disappear for a while in order for the people they love to survive. "Come north," Elias said. "I am too old for castles," Marcus said, "and someone has to make sure this village remembers." Elias nodded. They held each other's arms for a moment, the way old men do when words are not quite enough. Then Marcus stepped back, and Elias walked away. The next morning, Elias rose before the sun, as he had every day for 23 years. He moved through the farmhouse quietly, touching familiar things one last time: the rough edge of the table, the window latch, the shelf where the letter had been hidden for so long. He opened the box beneath the floorboards and took out the black iron ring with the howling wolf crest. He did not put it on. He held it in his palm and looked at it for a moment. Then he closed his fingers around it and walked out the door. Nadia was waiting outside. Behind her, the council members were already mounted. Soren stood with them, shoulders straight, watching the road north. The morning air was cold and clean, and smelled of coming rain. They walked together, father and daughter, down the long road away from Coldbrook. The village was still quiet behind them, still waking up, still carrying on with the ordinary business of an ordinary morning. Somewhere behind them, a rooster called. Somewhere ahead, the northern territories were waiting for a king who had spent more than 2 decades growing turnips and mending walls, and learning, in the most unhurried way possible, what actually mattered. He had not been broken by the years. He had not been diminished by the silence or the poverty or the unkind words of small people who did not know what they were looking at. He had simply been waiting, not for rescue, not for recognition, but for the moment when protecting his family no longer required hiding from the world. That moment had come. And Elias Morrow, farmer, father, and the man every single person in Coldbrook had dismissed without a second thought, walked forward into it with the same steady, unhurried calm with which he had done everything else in his life. Some rivers run loudest at the surface. The deepest ones make almost no sound at all. But nothing in the world can stop them from reaching the sea.